In human history, few peoples have left behind such a profound paradox as the Guanche, the ancient inhabitants of the Canary Islands located off the coast of northwest Africa. When the first Spanish fleet set foot on these volcanic islands in the early 15th century, they not only discovered a society that had never been documented in any records, but also faced a question beyond the logic of the age. How could a community living on islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean have no boats, no seafaring technology, and seemingly no memory of how they had arrived there? The Guanche lived on islands separated by the sea, spoke dialects that no one on the outside understood, and possessed morphological features that puzzled Europeans, ranging from superior height to fair skin, blonde or red hair, and light-colored eyes, an image completely different from the surrounding North African peoples. From very early on, these records ignited speculations about a lost race, even remnants of Atlantis, or lost biblical tribes. But it was not until the era of modern genetics that the true nature of the Guanche gradually emerged. Geographically, the Canary Islands are only over 100 kilometers from the coast of Morocco, but oceanographically, they are among the most difficult regions to access in the Atlantic Ocean. The Canary Current flows strongly from north to south along the West African coast, while trade winds blow from the northeast, creating a natural system of forces that makes accidental drifting from the continent to the islands nearly impossible. If a primitive raft were to leave the African shore, it would tend to be pushed out into the vast Atlantic, instead of being carried to the Canaries. Conversely, to reach the archipelago from Europe, seafarers must struggle against both wind and currents. This means that the initial settlement of the Canaries required seaworthy vessels and active navigation skills. Yet, when 19th century archaeologists began excavating Guanche villages, they found no trace of maritime technology, no harbors, no boat fragments, no stone anchors, and no cultural symbols related to seafaring. The Guanche fished along the coast using simple nets and hooks, but they seemingly never left shallow waters. Even islands within sight of each other, just a few dozen kilometers apart, developed distinct dialects and traditions, indicating that the residents of each island hardly interacted with one another by sea. They were island communities imprisoned by the ocean. It was this very isolation that transformed the Guanche into a rare genetic archive. When scientists began sequencing ancient DNA from Guanche mummies in the early 21st century, they discovered that the inhabitants of the Canaries were not a mysterious group existing outside human history, but rather the direct descendants of a branch of ancient North African people closely related to the Berbers. Mitochondrial haplogroups, such as U6B1 and H1CF, characteristic of prehistoric North Africa, appeared with high frequency in Guanche samples, while Y chromosomes revealed lineages EM81 and EM78, which are linked to modern Berber communities. However, the genetic picture did not end there. What was truly astonishing was that the Guanche genome still contained variants associated with Ice Age Europeans, specifically alleles related to light skin, hair, and eye pigmentation. These variants were once common in populations residing in European refugia, such as Iberia and the Balkans, when ice sheets covered much of the continent, but they were diluted or vanished from mainland North Africa through thousands of years of subsequent migrations and intermixing. On the Canaries, they were preserved in a nearly pristine state, as the Guanche had no contact with Middle Eastern farming migration waves, Arab invasions, or trans-Saharan admixture. This leads to an important conclusion. The Guanche were not Europeans lost in Africa, but rather the descendants of a prehistoric population that once stretched from Europe down to North Africa during a period when the climate was still humid and the Sahara had not yet become a desert. When the climate changed about 5,000 years ago, desertification cut off communication routes, and North African communities were either isolated or swept up in new migration waves. The Guanche, trapped on the islands, escaped that process. They carried within them an ancient mixture of North African Berber and Ice Age Europeans, a blend that vanished from the mainland but was preserved by the ocean on the Canaries. This biological isolation is clearly reflected in the Guanche mummies, one of the best preserved collections of natural and semi-artificial mummies in the world. In the dry caves of Tenerife and Gran Canaria, hundreds of bodies have been found, with skin, hair, and even eyebrows intact. Unlike Egypt, the Guanche did not remove internal organs and did not use natron. They dried the body using sunlight, volcanic ash, and aromatic resins, then wrapped it in goat skins and placed it in airtight burial caves. Their purpose was not to prepare for an abstract afterlife, but to maintain the presence of ancestors within the community of the living. Isotope analysis in teeth and bones shows that they were pastoralists and semi-nomadic farmers, living primarily on goat milk, meat, barley, figs, and fish. Some Guanche populations even had a lactose tolerance rate of over 60% higher than most modern North African groups, reflecting a long history of milk consumption and natural selection in an island environment. These mummies also provide direct evidence for the morphological characteristics that once astonished the Spaniards. Although the majority of the Guanche had dark hair and brown eyes like other North African communities, the proportion of individuals with light hair and light eyes was unusually high, aligning with the ancient genetic variants discovered in their DNA. This confirms that descriptions of blonde-haired warriors and blue-eyed women were not merely products of colonial imagination, but reflected a rare biological reality. Parallel to their biological legacy, the Guanche also left behind a mysterious cultural and architectural landscape. On Tenerife, the stepped pyramids of Guimar were constructed from volcanic stone, arranged in a geometric order with orientation axes aligned with the summer and winter solstices. While debates persist regarding their age and purpose, substantial evidence suggests they were not merely random agricultural stone heaps, but ceremonial structures linked to solar cycles. Across the islands, stone circles, cairns, and spiral carvings appear, bearing similarities to megalithic art in the Mediterranean and North Africa. This suggests that the Guanche may have preserved fragments of a Neolithic ceremonial and astronomical tradition that was once widespread when the Sahara was still a green savanna. Their religious beliefs reinforce this hypothesis. The sun, under the name Akhaman or Magek, was the ultimate source of life, while the Teide volcano was the dwelling place of Guayota, a destructive entity imprisoned within the earth. Legends about Guayota kidnapping the sun and the world plunging into darkness until the supreme god intervened reflect a worldview tightly bound to natural cycles. The Guanche organized rituals at dawn, buried the dead facing east, and viewed the volcano as an axis connecting earth and sky. It was a belief system with deep similarities to ancient solar religions in North Africa, the Mediterranean, and prehistoric Europe, preserved in isolation while they had vanished elsewhere. That isolation ended brutally when the fleets of Castile and Aragon arrived in 1402. The conquest of the Canaries lasted nearly a century, and although the Guanche resisted fiercely with wooden spears, stone knives, and knowledge of the terrain, they could not withstand European guns, steel, and tactics. However, what destroyed them the fastest was not war, but disease. Smallpox, measles, and typhus swept through communities that had never been exposed to old world pathogens, killing tens of thousands within a few decades. The survivors were enslaved or forcibly converted. And within just 1 or 2 generations, the Guanche language vanished. Solar beliefs were replaced by Catholicism, and the ancient social structure disintegrated. However, cultural disappearance does not mean biological extinction. Modern DNA analysis shows that about half of the ancestry of today's Canarians comes from the Guanche, which is particularly evident in mitochondrial lines, reflecting the reality that indigenous women often survived and had children with European men. In the veins of millions of modern Canarians still flow the U6 and H1 CF haplogroups that once belonged to the mummies in the volcanic caves. In this sense, the Guanche never completely disappeared. They exist in silence, hidden beneath the surface of a modern society. The Guanche story, therefore, is not a myth about a lost white tribe, but rather a testament to how history and genetics intersect. They are the remnants of an Ice Age world that once linked Europe and North Africa, separated by oceans and deserts, and then obscured by colonial history. Their mummies, pyramids, and DNA sequences show that the human past is not a linear path of evolution, but a network of branches, where some branches are strangely preserved in unexpected places. The Guanche are one of those branches, and through modern science, we are only beginning to understand that they were not just ancient residents of the Canaries, but keepers of the genetic memory of an entire lost era.